A simple act of kindness can lead to the most unexpected consequences. When one woman helps a stranger in need, she has no idea that her life is about to take a dramatic turn. What happens next will leave everyone speechless. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment where kindness came back to you in ways you never imagined? The diner smelled like fresh coffee and warm syrup, the kind of place where regulars sat in the same booths every morning, their hands wrapped around thick ceramic mugs as they swapped stories about the good old days. It was a quiet Wednesday night, the kind Jasmine Holloway liked best. She moved between the tables with practiced ease, refilling coffee cups, sliding plates onto tables, and offering warm smiles that softened even the grumpiest customer. Her apron pocket was weighed down by a notepad and a handful of crumpled dollar bills, tips from earlier in the evening. Benny's diner wasn't exactly a gold mine, but it paid the bills. The bell above the door jingled, and Jasmine turned just in time to see an older man shuffle inside. He wore a tattered brown coat, his boots caked with dried mud, and his gray beard was unkempt, hanging over the collar of his jacket like he hadn't shaved in weeks. He kept his head down as he moved, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of the world had settled there long ago. Jasmine had seen enough people come through those doors to know when someone was down on their luck. He didn't walk with the confident stride of the truckers passing through, or the easy familiarity of the town's locals. He walked like a man who wasn't sure if he even belonged here. She grabbed a menu and made her way over before he could settle too deep into himself. "Evening," she said with a warm smile. "Coffee?" The man glanced up at her, his blue eyes sharp despite the lines of exhaustion on his face. He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yes, ma'am, that'd be real nice." His voice was rough, like gravel rolling down a dirt road. Jasmine poured the coffee, watching him out of the corner of her eye. He cradled the cup in both hands, bringing it close to his face as if savoring the warmth more than the drink itself. She set the menu down in front of him, but he barely glanced at it. "I'll come back in a few to take your order," she said lightly. "Much appreciated," he murmured, but he didn't touch the menu. Jasmine busied herself with the other tables, but her attention kept drifting back to him. He just sat there, sipping his coffee, his eyes darting toward the door every time it swung open like he was expecting someone, or avoiding them. After a few minutes she returned, her notepad at the ready. "What can I get you?" The man hesitated. He cleared his throat and shifted in his seat, then finally shook his head. "Just the coffee, miss." She glanced down at the menu, then back at him. "You sure? We've got some good specials tonight." He smiled, but it was thin and tired. "I appreciate it, but He stopped himself. His gaze dropped to the tabletop, and he exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. Jasmine didn't need him to say it. She'd seen that look before. Without thinking too much about it, she tucked her notepad into her apron, turned on her heel, and made her way to the counter. She grabbed a plate and, before she could talk herself out of it, started fixing up a meal. A warm bowl of chicken and dumplings, the kind that stuck to your ribs, and a thick slice of cornbread with butter melting into its golden crust. When she set it down in front of him, the man straightened, his brows knitting together in surprise. "I didn't order this," he said, looking between her and the plate. "It's on the house," she said, offering him a small shrug. "Everyone deserves a hot meal." For a moment he didn't move. His hands hovered over the table, as if he was afraid to touch the food. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he picked up the spoon and took a careful bite. His eyes closed for a second, just a second, like he was letting himself remember what a real meal tasted like. Jasmine didn't linger. She had the feeling that whatever this man had been through, he wasn't the type to take pity easily. Instead, she went back to work, letting him eat in peace. But as the night went on, she kept catching glimpses of him. He ate slowly, savoring every bite. When the last of the cornbread was gone, he set the spoon down and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Then, he did something she hadn't expected. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, creased envelope. He stared at it for a long time, his fingers running over the edges like he was debating whether or not to open it. Finally, he sighed, folded it back up, and slipped it away again. When Jasmine came to clear the table, he looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, miss," he said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." She smiled. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." He nodded, pushing back from the table. "I should be going. You sure you don't want to take a cup of coffee for the road?" He let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "No, I got some things to take care of." Jasmine watched as he stood, adjusting his coat. He hesitated for a moment, like he wanted to say something else, but in the end he just gave her a small nod and turned toward the door. As he stepped outside, she felt a strange pull in her chest, an unshakable feeling that their paths weren't quite done crossing yet. She just didn't know how right she was. Jasmine didn't think much about the old man after he left. The diner had its fair share of wandering souls, truckers, drifters, folks just passing through. They came, they went, and life moved on. But something about him stayed with her. Maybe it was the way he cradled that cup of coffee like it was the only warmth he'd felt in days. Or the hesitation in his voice when he turned down a meal, as if he was ashamed of his own hunger. The dinner rush slowed, and she found herself wiping down the counter with a little too much focus. Benny, the owner, was counting the register at the end of the bar, humming some old tune under his breath. He was a round man with a kind face, the kind of boss who'd let a waitress slip a free meal to a hungry man without batting an eye. "You all right, Jazz?" he asked without looking up. She nodded, setting her rag down. "Yeah. Just thinking." Benny chuckled. "That's dangerous." She rolled her eyes, but smiled anyway. "The old guy that came in earlier, ever seen him before?" Benny shook his head. Nah, looked like he'd been through it, though. Jasmine leaned against the counter, staring out the window. The night had settled in deep, the neon sign outside casting a dull glow on the sidewalk. "He'd barely touched his coffee before he left," she murmured. Benny sighed, closing the register. "Some people ain't used to kindness, Jazz. They don't know what to do with it." She knew he was right. She also knew she'd probably never see the old man again. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Jasmine was wiping down the same counter when she heard the bell above the door jingle. She turned, expecting one of the usual morning regulars, old Earl with his newspaper, maybe Mary Beth looking for extra syrup on her pancakes. Instead, it was him. The old man. His coat was the same, but something about him looked different. Maybe it was the way he stood a little straighter. Or maybe it was the brown envelope he held in his hand, clutched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Jasmine set down her rag. "Morning," she said carefully. He gave her a small nod and stepped up to the counter, but he didn't sit, just stood there, like he wasn't sure what to do next. She poured him a cup of coffee before he had to ask. He took it with a murmured thanks, but he didn't drink it right away. Instead, he slid the envelope onto the counter between them. "I need to send this," he said, his voice gruff but steady. "Don't know where to start." Jasmine frowned, glancing down at the envelope. The edges were worn, the paper yellowed with time. It had been folded and unfolded so many times it was a wonder it hadn't fallen apart. She picked it up carefully. "Who's it for?" His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "My daughter." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. She turned the envelope over, half expecting to see an address, but there was nothing, just his name written in neat, careful letters in the corner. Walter Benson. Jasmine looked back at him. "You don't know where she is?" He shook his head. "Haven't seen her since she was a baby." The weight of those words settled between them. Jasmine had never been the kind of person to pry, but she could see the way his fingers tightened around the coffee cup, how his shoulders stiffened just enough to betray the years of regret he was carrying. She hesitated, then took a breath. "Tell me about her." Walter exhaled sharply, almost like he'd been waiting for someone to ask. He sat down slowly, resting his elbows on the counter. "Angela," he murmured. "Her name's Angela." Jasmine leaned in, listening. "She was born just before I shipped out," he said. "Vietnam. Her mother, Caroline. She wanted me to stay. I wanted to, too, but the draft didn't care much about what I wanted." He gave a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "By the time I came back, Caroline was gone. Left town, took Angela with her. I tried to find them, wrote letters, but the world kept moving without me." Jasmine's fingers brushed the envelope. "You ever try again?" Walter nodded, staring into his coffee. "Years ago. Hired a guy to track them down. By then, Angela was grown, Caroline had passed." His jaw tensed. "She had a life, a family. I didn't want to barge in just to say, 'Hey, remember me? The father you never knew.'" Jasmine understood that kind of fear, the fear of being too late. She ran her thumb over the worn paper. "And now?" Walter exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Now I'm just an old man with a letter I should have sent 20 years ago." Jasmine studied him for a moment. Then she made a decision. She slid the envelope back toward him. "You're not just an old man, and it's not too late." He looked up at her, something cautious flickering in his eyes. She tapped the counter. "Let me help you find her." Walter stared at her like she'd just spoken a foreign language. "Why would you do that?" Jasmine shrugged. "Because someone should." Silence stretched between them. The sounds of the diner, muffled conversations, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, faded into the background. Then, slowly, Walter nodded. "All right," he said. "All right." Jasmine smiled, already forming a plan. Neither of them noticed the dark SUV parked across the street, the two men inside, watching through the diner window. By tomorrow, their quiet little world would never be the same. Jasmine didn't know what she had signed herself up for, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let Walter Benson carry his regret alone any longer. After her shift ended, she sat with him at a corner booth, her phone balanced between them as she scrolled through pages of information. She had always been good at finding things, an instinct honed by years of helping people around town connect the dots on lost relatives, forgotten debts, and old promises. But this was different. This was someone's life. Walter sat with his hands clasped in front of him, his knuckles pale with tension. He was watching the screen, but his mind was somewhere else. "You okay?" Jasmine asked, keeping her voice gentle. He exhaled through his nose. "I don't know what I'll even say if we find her." Jasmine looked up. "What do you want to say?" He hesitated, rubbing a hand over his beard. I want her to know I thought about her, that I never meant to leave her." His voice lowered, as if he was speaking more to himself than to her. "That she was never forgotten." Jasmine nodded. "Then, that's what you'll say." She kept searching, skimming through old records, birth announcements, anything that might lead to Angela Benson. But before she could click on another link, the bell above the diner's entrance jingled again. Two men in uniform stepped inside. Jasmine froze. Walter stiffened, his grip tightening around his coffee cup. The soldiers scanned the room before their eyes landed on him. They didn't hesitate. They moved with purpose, their boots thudding against the checkered tile floor. Jasmine straightened, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Walter," she murmured, but he was already turning to face them. The taller of the two men, a broad-shouldered officer with a serious face, stopped just short of their table. He looked at Walter for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Benson?" Walter's jaw clenched. He sat up a little straighter. "Yeah, who's asking?" The officer extended a hand. "Lieutenant Daniel McGraw, United States Army. This is Sergeant Cole Everett." Waldo didn't take his hand. Jasmine felt the air shift, thick with something unspoken. The lieutenant lowered his hand, but his expression remained respectful. "We've been trying to find you." Walter scoffed. "Took you long enough." Sergeant Everett cleared his throat. Sir, we were contacted by a woman named Angela Freeman. She's been looking for her father. The name hit the air like a thunderclap. Walter's fingers twitched. His mouth opened slightly before closing again. His throat worked through a swallow, but no words came. Jasmine's own shock was drowned out by a swelling warmth in her chest. They had found her. Angela, she... Walter's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, gripping the edge of the table. She's been looking for me? McGraw nodded. Yes, sir. We received a letter a few months back from her. She'd been reaching out to different veterans organizations, trying to find any trace of you. Walter exhaled shakily. Jasmine reached over, placing a hand over his. She's alive, he whispered. She's alive, Jasmine confirmed, squeezing his hand. Everett pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and placed it on the table. She wanted to find you, sir. She left her contact information. If you'd like, we can arrange a call. Walter stared at the paper like it might vanish if he blinked. His fingers trembled as he reached for it, unfolding it with careful precision. The handwriting was neat, slightly slanted. Dead. If you're out there, I want to talk. I want to know you. Angela Freeman. Jasmine watched as Walter read it again and again. His weathered face, usually so guarded, softened with something fragile. She doesn't hate me, he murmured. Jasmine smiled. Of course she does. McGraw gave them a moment before speaking again. Sir, Angela is in North Carolina. She said she'd be willing to meet you. Walter blinked up at him. She really wants that? Yes, sir. Walter sucked in a deep breath. He pressed the paper against his chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Jasmine leaned forward. So, what do you want to do? Walter didn't answer right away. His fingers tightened around the letter, his breath coming unsteady. But then, slowly, a decision settled over his face. I want to see her. McGraw nodded. We can arrange that. She asked if you'd be willing to meet her at a veterans center in Raleigh. We can take care of the travel. Walter looked at Jasmine, his eyes searching hers. She gave him a reassuring nod. You should go, she said. He swallowed hard and looked back at McGraw. Yeah. Okay. The soldiers exchanged a glance before Everett pulled out his phone. I'll make the call. As he stepped away, Jasmine could see Walter struggling to breathe evenly. She rested a hand on his arm. You got this, she whispered. He gave a small, shaky nod. Everett returned a few moments later, his phone still in his hand. She's on the line. Walter froze, his lips parted, his body rigid. Jasmine nudged him gently. Pick it up. He hesitated, then reached out, his fingers wrapping around the phone like it might disappear. He lifted it to his ear. Hello? A pause. A breath. Then, a voice Jasmine couldn't hear, but could feel. Walter's eyes glistened, his shoulders shook with something unspoken. Angela. The word came out in a whisper, barely audible. Another pause. Then, a smile broke across Walter's face. A real one. Jasmine exhaled, her own heart swelling. For the first time in decades, Walter Benson was no longer a man lost in the past. He was a father finding his way home. Walter had barely slept the night before. Not that he was the kind of man who needed much sleep to begin with, but this was different. His body was exhausted, but his mind wouldn't rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Angela, not as the infant he last held, not as the vague memory he had clung to over the years, but as the woman she was now. A woman who had searched for him. A woman who wanted to see him. As the sun rose, Jasmine knocked on his motel door, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. Figured you'd be up, she said with a knowing smile. Walter accepted the coffee with a quiet chuckle. Was it that obvious? She leaned against the doorframe. You've got a big day ahead of you. Walter stared at the dark liquid in his cup, the steam curling into the morning air. Yeah, he murmured. Biggest one in a long time. They left an hour later, riding in the back of an Army-issued vehicle with Lieutenant McGraw and Sergeant Everett up front. The road stretched ahead, long and unfamiliar, yet somehow leading home. Walter stared out the window, the weight of years pressing against him. He thought about the letter he had carried for decades, the words he had never been able to say, the regrets that had nearly buried him. But today, he was finally doing something about it. Jasmine sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. "You nervous?" Walter exhaled. "More than I ever was in combat." She smiled, nudging him lightly. "She wants this, Walter. Just remember that." He nodded, gripping the letter in his hands, the one he had rewritten 1,000 times but never mailed. The Veterans Center was quiet when they arrived, the American flag waving gently in the warm breeze. Walter stepped out of the car, his boots scuffing against the pavement. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Jasmine touched his arm. "You ready?" Walter looked at the building, then back at her. His breath was unsteady, but his resolve was firm. "I'm ready." Inside, the hall smelled of fresh coffee and old paper. A few men in uniform sat around talking, some playing chess in the corner. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes, stood and gestured toward a room down the hall.
"She's waiting for you," she said softly.
Jasmine stayed by his side as they walked down the hallway. Walter's palms felt clammy, his heart a drum against his ribs. He had fought wars, survived battles, and endured more than most men could bear. But nothing had ever scared him like this. Then he saw her. Angela Freeman stood in the middle of the room, hands clasped in front of her, eyes wide and uncertain. She was in her 40s now, her dark curls streaked with gray, her features a mix of her mother's softness and his own sharp lines. For a moment, neither of them moved. Walter's breath caught in his throat. "My God," he whispered. "You look just like her." Angela took a trembling step forward. "And you look just like the picture." Her voice was quiet, full of something fragile but not broken. Walter swallowed hard. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I never stopped thinking about you." Angela's lips pressed together, her eyes shining. "I thought you didn't want me." Walter took a shaky breath, his chest tightening. "That's not true." His voice was rough but steady now. "I thought about you every day. I wanted to find you, but I was afraid of what you'd think of me, afraid it was too late." Angela inhaled sharply, her chin trembling. "I waited for you." Jasmine stood still, watching the moment unfold, her heart swelling. Walter took a step forward. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. I just wanted—" His voice broke, and he shook his head. "I just wanted to see you, to tell you I'm sorry." Angela wiped her eyes quickly. Then, after a long, painful second, she whispered, "I don't want an apology, Dad. I just want to know you." Walter blinked. Dad. It had been a lifetime since he had heard that word directed at him. A choked sound left his throat as Angela stepped forward, hesitating only for a moment before wrapping her arms around him. Walter's breath left him in a rush. His arms, scarred, strong but fragile in this moment, wrapped around his daughter, holding on to her like she was the only thing keeping him standing. And maybe she was. Jasmine let out a slow breath, smiling as she wiped away a tear of her own. For all the years lost, for all the words left unsaid, for all the regrets that had weighed Walter down, this moment made them lighter. Angela pulled back just enough to look at him. "We have time, right?" Walter nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, sweetheart, we have time." They sat together for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Walter told her about Caroline, about the war, about the mistakes he wished he could change. Angela told him about her childhood, her family, her life. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to erase the past. But it was a start. By the time the sun began to set, Walter and Angela stood at the entrance of the center, watching the sky burn in shades of orange and gold. Jasmine stepped up beside them, hands on her hips. "So," she said with a grin, "what's next?" Angela turned to Walter. "How about dinner?" Walter chuckled, wiping at his eyes. "I think I'd like that." Angela smiled. "Good. My kids are going to want to meet their grandfather." Walter stilled. Her kids. His grandchildren. He had never let himself imagine it before. Never let himself hope. And yet here he was. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "I'd like to meet them too." Jasmine clapped a hand on his back. "Looks like you've got a whole family waiting on you, Benson." Walter let out a breath, looking at Angela, then Jasmine, then back at the horizon. For the first time in decades, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't walking this road alone.